altered in the way that she wants it to be. Even she will find herself being dominated by the Spectre's will, Spectre's lust for vengeance. So Xanadu gives up the power of the Spectre, and she offers to use her magic to allow Corrigan to enter the afterlife. And Jim, in what's going to be the first of at least a couple of occasions during this run, declines the offer and says, "No, this power is my responsibility. I have to take it back." And so Jim Corrigan and the Spectre once again become one. And it leads to Xanadu departing. But before she does, she shares something important with Amy and Jim. She explains that she, of course, can see people's futures, and she has seen a glimpse of Amy's future. And in her vision, Xanadu sees Amy dying alone in an alleyway, bleeding to death, presumably as a result of a stabbing. And Xanadu apologizes, and she says, "Well, this is fate. This is what will happen." And she takes her leave. And it is there that Jim swears to stay by Amy's side and to ensure that what Madame Xanadu has seen will not come to pass. And that's great, except Jim Corrigan is the Spectre. And you know that at some point, someone or something is going to stir up the Spectre's thirst for vengeance, and that is going to take Jim from Amy's side. But at this point, at least, Amy is thinking that Jim will be there for her. He's that adamant that nothing can keep him from leaving her. All right, I need to talk a bit about Nate Kane, the detective from the NYPD, who is a friend of Amy's. And I can't remember if I mentioned this in part one. So, if not, please, if I did, please bear with me. Nate clearly is attracted to Amy. And it's clear that she has some feelings for Nate as well, even though there appears to be an age difference, a noticeable age difference. I say that Nate is anywhere from 15 to 20 years older than Amy, but they clearly appreciate each other. And if it weren't for the fact that Amy was ill, there's no doubt that Nate would act upon his feelings, tell Amy how he truly feels about her, and pursue a relationship with her. But he feels that he can't because she has AIDS. And it's not just because she has AIDS. Certainly this series is being written at a time when there was a large stigma against the virus, but we're going to learn that it's something else that keeps Nate from being able to even touch Amy on the shoulder or to touch her hand, despite her telling him that he won't get AIDS from such a simple touch. But we see Nate, who is continuing to investigate the Reaver serial murders. And in the beginning, it looks like the murderer is someone who is targeting young women. But Nate comes across something along with his fellow officers which shows that there's another layer to it. The Reaver is killing young women who have the AIDS virus. And in the course of recovering one of the Reaver's victims from the river, a dive team has also pulled up a decades-old keg that has been filled with cement, and there's evidence of human remains within the concrete. And the forensics team finds that the concrete dried around the victim such that the concrete has actually become a mold which can be used to create a maquette, if you will, of the victim. And so Nate gets a look at this maquette or a bust of the victim, and he gets thinking about Jim Corrigan again. And so we see him in his office, and he's typing away at the computer, and he's saying, "Damn you, Corrigan, damn you and your old man, and maybe his old man too." And Nate comes across an image of Jim Corrigan from the 1940s, and you just get the sense of the chill going down Nate's spine as he says, "Oh my God, Corrigan, it's not your old man, it's you. It's you." And he realizes that Corrigan is the one who died in that keg that was filled with cement. Now, Nate has been told by the captain at the precinct not to tell anyone that the Reaver is targeting women with AIDS. And Nate is told specifically not to tell Amy because she will go to the media and reveal this, and it's going to blow the case open and blow any chance that the NYPD has of bringing the Reaver in. Well, now that Nate has made the connection between Corrigan and possibly the Spectre, all he knows at this point is that there's something wrong with Corrigan. He's the undead. So Nate's first instinct is to go to Amy's apartment, and he busts in, and of course Corrigan is there protecting Amy, but there's a case of mistaken identity, and Corrigan thinks that Nate is the one who is going to kill Amy. So he quickly transforms into the Spectre, reaches into Nate's mind, and prepares to deliver some pretty brutal psychic vengeance. And here we learn that Nate's fear with regards to Amy and her condition, it isn't just about the AIDS virus, it's about disease in general. We learned that Nate has lost so many loved ones, people close to him, through diseases such as tuberculosis, hepatitis, and he's terrified of contracting any disease and dying from that. And so the Spectre eventually realizes that Nate isn't there to kill Amy, but he basically calls Nate out on his innermost fear. And Spectre goes one further, and he reveals to Amy that the Reaver serial killer is targeting women with AIDS. And of course, Amy goes to the media and reveals this and gets Nate in a whole lot of hot water. We do get to see the Reaver at different points. At one point, he actually goes into a church and he murders the priest, seemingly breaking his modus operandi, which any number of serial killers throughout real-world history have done. And this is an important setup for the introduction or reintroduction of a character in the next story arc. Suffice to say, Corrigan and Nate are having difficulty tracking down the Reaver through their own respective means. Of course, Corrigan is strongly intent on staying by Amy's side. But then we get the return of Asmodeus, who hadn't been seen since showcase number 60, the issue which reintroduced the Spectre to the DCU. Asmodeus is going to have a pretty major role in the desecration storyline, but here he appears to be running interference. He's aware that Jim is trying to protect this young woman who he's fallen in love with. And so Asmodeus does his best to distract the Spectre, to get him to leave Amy's side. And we see Madame Xanadu try to do her bit to make amends with the Spectre, in which she confronts Asmodeus, manages to get him to back off, and which leads to him threatening to deal with her later. But it's just enough that Corrigan is pulled away at that point, at which the Reaver identifies Amy as the woman who gave him AIDS. And it's pretty interesting because Ostrander never makes it clear one way or another whether the Reaver actually was one of Amy's lovers. For all we know, Amy could very well have unwittingly passed the AIDS virus onto the Reaver. But in any event, Madame Xanadu's vision plays out, and Amy is stabbed multiple times, and she is left to bleed out in an alleyway. Tragically, Nate comes upon her, and Amy pleads with Nate to stay with her, to hold her hand, to just comfort her through the last of her pain. And of course, Nate is racked with fear, but he's also racked with guilt at this point. He says, "No, Amy, I can't." He ends up chasing down the Reaver, and he kills the Reaver point blank, something which will get Nate into even greater hot water with at HQ later on. The Spectre does not get back in time to save Amy. He doesn't even get to exact vengeance upon the Reaver. But again, Madame Xanadu steps up, and that she decides to cheat in a way. In her vision, Amy died alone in the alley, but Xanadu stays by Amy's side and offers her whatever comfort she can as Amy passes on. So the Spectre gets back just in time to make a last-ditch effort to grab hold of Amy's spirit and keep her from entering the light. It looks almost like a replay of what Corrigan did when he brought Clarice's soul back from almost entering the afterlife. But this time, Amy is able to reach through to Corrigan, and she says, "Jim, I'm not in any pain anymore. My body won't be ravaged any longer. My body's gone. I'm changing into this beautiful entity, and I can sense a peace here. Please, just let me go. But before you let me go, let's just have one embrace, the one thing I've been wanting for so long." And we see the Spectre transform into Jim Corrigan, and he and Amy have that loving embrace, and then he lets her go. Now, back on the ground, Nate confronts the Spectre, and he gives the Spectre a pretty good tongue lashing and says, "You're a horrible being. You have these horrific powers, and you promised Amy that you were going to take care of her, and yet you failed. So just you be careful, buddy. I'm going to be watching you from now on." And the Spectre appears rather disaffected by this. And the Spectre doesn't say a word and just flies off. But when we see the Spectre in the night sky, we get this really neat close-up by Mandrake, and the Spectre pulls back his hood, and we get the spectral visage of Jim Corrigan, and he's crying, and the last word he says to wrap up this first story arc is Amy. Now, Amy is a crucial character who dies relatively early on in this run, but she is referenced so many times throughout this run. She'll make a couple of really